Morning fog rolls across the Golden Horn in the autumn of 1478, settling into the courtyards of a palace still half built, half dream. The air tastes of salt and sawdust. Somewhere beyond the unfinished walls, hammers strike brass. Oxen groan under the weight of marble slabs hauled from quarries days away. The sunrise catches gilded eaves that few will ever see up close, turning them momentarily into fire. Already, this place has consumed more gold, more timber, more human hours than most cities will require in a generation. Already it is beautiful. Already it is fragile. Topkapi Palace rises on the tip of Istanbul's historic peninsula, where Europe and Asia press against each other across narrow water. Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, chose this promontory not for comfort but for declaration. The old Byzantine Acropolis had stood here once, a symbol of empire that he had shattered just 25 years earlier. Now he would build something new, something that would announce to every ship entering the Bosphorus that the world had changed hands. But declarations are expensive, and this one would cost more than anyone standing in that foggy courtyard could possibly imagine. The palace complex eventually sprawls across 700,000 square meters. 4 successive courtyards step inward, like a progression through reality itself, from the public world of administration and justice to the private sanctum where sultans sleep and breathe. The outer walls stretch for 5 kilometers, studded with towers that serve both as watchtosts and architectural exclamations. Inside these walls, the imperial council chamber with its conical dome, the treasury with its vault doors thick as a man's torso, the harem with its labyrinth of 300 rooms, kitchens designed to feed 4,000 people daily, stables for thousands of horses, mosques, libraries, hospitals, schools, armories, and pavilions whose sole purpose is beauty. The largest kitchen alone covers 6,000 square meters, its 10 chimneys visible from across the city. When all 20 kitchens burn at full capacity during state banquets, the smoke rises like a small volcanic eruption. But smoke requires wood. Beauty requires maintenance. Declaration requires constant repetition. Mehmed II's understood power as performance, but he also understood it as infrastructure. Born in 1432 in Edirne, third son of Murad II, he spent his youth in a court riven by conspiracy and his adolescence preparing for the siege that would define him. Tutored in mathematics, astronomy, languages, and military engineering, he read histories of Alexander and Caesar not as myth, but as instruction manuals. When he took Constantinople at age 21 after a 53-day siege, he did not simply conquer a city. He inherited an empire's administrative burden and a metropolis in ruins, its population scattered, its infrastructure collapsed, its economy a memory. Building Topkapi was not vanity. It was the physical manifestation of legitimacy, a statement that the Ottoman state would endure and function. Every sultan needs a center from which to govern, and Mehmed needed one that could house not just himself, but the entire machinery of a multi-continental empire. He was demanding and visionary, capable of poetry and cruelty in equal measure, a man who commissioned translations of Greek philosophy while ordering executions for administrative failures. His palace would reflect this duality, exquisite tilework concealing dungeons, gardens planted above cisterns, beauty as both aspiration and mask. Construction began in 1459 and continued in waves for decades. The first phase required clearing the Byzantine ruins and leveling the ground, work performed by thousands of laborers whose names are lost. Stone came from quarries in Marmara and the Prince's Islands, transported by barge and then dragged by teams of men and animals up the sloping streets. Marble for columns and fountains arrived from quarries that had supplied Roman emperors a millennium earlier, the same veins now reopened by Ottoman masons. Timber for beams and scaffolding came from the forests of the Black Sea coast, floated downriver and across the sea, each log representing days of labor by men who never saw the palace they helped build. The craftsmen were another matter. Mehmed imported tile makers from Persia, bringing entire workshops to Istanbul and housing them in dedicated quarters. Master builders came from across Anatolia, bringing apprentices and techniques honed over generations. Wood carvers from Damascus, metalworkers from Cairo, calligraphers from Herat, each contributing their expertise to a structure that would display the empire's reach in every detail. The Sultan's wages for skilled craftsmen were generous by the standards of the time, but generosity is relative. A master tile maker might earn enough to support his family, but he worked 12-hour days in summer, shaping clay and mixing glazes in workshops thick with dust and fumes. His apprentices earned less and worked longer. The boys who hauled materials earned almost nothing, their compensation often just food and a place to sleep. Numbers tell part of the story. By 1478, the palace employed approximately 5,000 people directly: guards, administrators, kitchen staff, gardeners, stable hands, cleaners, craftsmen in constant repair. By the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent in the mid-16th century, that number had swelled to nearly 12,000. Each person required payment, feeding, housing, supervision. The kitchens consumed roughly 400 sheep daily during ordinary periods, far more during festivals. Firewood for cooking and heating arrived by the cartload, requiring a permanent supply chain from forests hundreds of kilometers away. Water came from aqueducts and cisterns, but maintaining those ancient systems required continuous work by engineers and laborers who descended into darkness to patch leaks and clear silt. The harem alone, formalized and expanded under Suleiman and his wife Hurrem Sultan, became a city within a city. More than 300 rooms housed the Sultan's family, the Queen Mother, concubines, servants, eunuchs, and administrators. The chief black eunuch, one of the most powerful officials in the empire, oversaw this intricate world where rank and favor shifted like sand. Women entered the harem as slaves, purchased or captured, often as children. Some rose to extraordinary influence, becoming mothers of sultans or power brokers in their own right. Most remained servants, spending decades in gilded captivity, cleaning, cooking, embroidering, attending to others. Their labor made the harem function, but history rarely records their names. The eunuchs who guarded them endured a different cost. Castration was usually performed in childhood, often in Egypt or the Caucasus, before the boys were sold into Ottoman service. The procedure carried a mortality rate estimated at 60 to 90%. Those who survived faced a lifetime of health complications and social liminality, neither fully male nor female, in a world rigidly divided by gender. Yet within the palace, they could attain rank and wealth impossible elsewhere. The paradox of Topkapi appears again. Opportunity built on mutilation, power extracted from the powerless. Financing this operation required the revenue of an empire. The Ottoman state at its height controlled trade routes between 3 continents, taxing commerce, agriculture, and tribute from vassal states. A complex system of land tenure called the Timar provided income to cavalry officers in exchange for military service, creating a self-sustaining military class. Sultans also controlled monopolies on certain goods and extracted taxes from religious minorities, craftsmen's guilds, and urban markets. A portion of this vast income flowed to the palace, but never enough. Building projects always exceeded budgets. Wars drained treasuries. Droughts and plagues disrupted tax collection. Mehmed II financed much of Topkapi's construction through the spoils of conquest. Gold seized from Constantinople's churches, tribute from defeated cities, the sale of captives into slavery, all contributed to the palace rising stone by stone. Later, sultans relied on similar sources. Selim the Bavarian's conquest of Egypt in 1517 brought immense wealth, allowing his son Suleiman to expand and embellish the palace with unprecedented opulence. The treasury filled with jewels, relics, and precious objects that served both as wealth reserves and as symbols of divine favor. But treasure can be spent only once, and conquest cannot continue forever. By the late 16th century, the first cracks appeared. Military campaigns in Europe stalled, becoming expensive stalemates rather than profitable victories. Inflation from New World silver flooding European markets destabilized the Ottoman economy. The traditional Timar system began to erode as central authorities sold land rights for quick revenue, creating a tax farming class more interested in extraction than stability. Palace expenses, meanwhile, continued to climb. Each new sultan felt compelled to add his own pavilion, his own mosque, his own mark. Prestige demanded display. Display demanded money. The palace's heating system alone consumed staggering resources. Winters in Istanbul can be harsh, and the sprawling complex required hundreds of braziers and stoves to remain habitable. Wood arrived daily by the cartload during cold months, stockpiled in vast storage areas that themselves required maintenance. Teams of servants tended fires through the night, ensuring the sultan and his household never felt the cold. In the harem, where hierarchies were enforced through access to comfort, the best heated rooms went to the highest-ranking women. Lower servants shivered in outer chambers. Heat, like everything in Topkapi, was distributed according to power. The plumbing infrastructure represented another hidden marvel and burden. Roman aqueducts still supplied much of the city's water, but they required constant repair. The palace had its own cisterns, massive underground chambers that held reserves against siege or drought. Lead pipes carried water to fountains, bathhouses, and the palace kitchens. The Ottomans were masters of water management, creating systems that rivals admired and envied. But lead corrodes, pipes crack, cisterns leak. A permanent crew of maintenance workers spent their lives underground, wading through water in near darkness, patching leaks and clearing blockages. When pipes failed in winter, sections of the palace went dry until repairs were completed, sometimes days or weeks later. Then came the crises, each revealing the palace's fundamental fragility. In 1622, Sultan Osman II attempted to reform the Janissary Corps, the elite infantry that had become a conservative political force resistant to change. The Janissaries responded by depositing him and executing him in the same dungeon beneath Topkapi that had held his enemies. His successor, Mustafa the Fur, was mentally unstable and controlled by factions within the palace. Power shifted to the harem, where the queen mother and senior concubines maneuvered to place their sons or favorites on the throne. The palace that Mehmed built as a symbol of strength became an arena of paranoia, a place where sultans were prisoners of their own household troops. The political instability had financial consequences. Weak sultans meant weak central authority, which meant tax revenues diverted to local strongmen and corrupt officials. The palace still needed feeding, heating, staffing, but the treasury that supplied it grew unreliable. Salaries went unpaid, maintenance was deferred, gardens went untended, sections of the complex fell into disrepair, too expensive to maintain without clear political will or available funds. The devastating earthquake of 1766 cracked walls, toppled chimneys, and damaged structures across the complex. Mustafa III ordered repairs, but the treasury was already strained by ongoing wars with Russia. Reconstruction proceeded slowly, with cheaper materials and less skilled labor than the original builders had used. Some damaged sections were simply abandoned, their functions relocated to sturdier buildings. The palace began to shrink, not in legal boundaries, but in lived reality. Rooms that once hosted councils became storage. Wings that once hummed with activity stood silent. By the late 18th century, European-style palaces began to seem more modern, more rational, more in keeping with the Enlightenment values that Ottoman reformers increasingly admired. Topkapi, with its medieval layout and Islamic aesthetics, started to feel old-fashioned. Sultans began spending more time in newer palaces along the Bosphorus, where European architects designed buildings with ballrooms and throne rooms that mimicked Versailles. Topkapi remained the official seat of government and the symbolic heart of the empire, but it was no longer the center of daily life. The 19th century brought existential threats. Mahmud II, reforming sultan and destroyer of the Janissary Corps, moved many administrative functions out of Topkapi entirely, relocating them to newer, more efficient buildings. The harem, once the empire's political engine, became a backwater. Abdul-Majid I, who reigned from 1839 to 1861, largely abandoned Topkapi for Dolmabahce Palace, a colossal European-style structure built at ruinous expense on the Bosphorus shore. Dolmabahce consumed so much money, its construction cost 5 million Ottoman gold liras, roughly 35 tons of gold, that it helped push the empire toward bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Topkapi languished, staff numbers dwindled, maintenance budgets evaporated, the famous kitchens served fewer meals, the stables held fewer horses. The treasury still housed the empire's sacred relics, the sword of Muhammad, the staff of Moses, the arm of John the Baptist, but visitors became rare. The palace that once symbolized Ottoman power now symbolized Ottoman decline, a relic kept barely alive by tradition and inertia. The empire's collapse after World War I could have meant Topkapi's destruction. The Ottoman dynasty was abolished in 1922, the caliphate ended in 1924. The new Turkish Republic, secular and modernizing, had little use for a sultan's palace. Many Ottoman buildings were repurposed, demolished, or left to decay. But Topkapi was spared, transformed instead into a museum in 1924 by order of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. The decision was pragmatic. The palace held immense historical and cultural value, and tourism might provide revenue. It was also symbolic. The Republic would preserve the past but not be ruled by it. Converting a living palace into a museum required different labor, different expertise, different costs. Curators and conservators replaced eunuchs and concubines. Archivists cataloged collections that had accumulated over 4 centuries. Restoration teams assessed structural damage, peeling back layers of later additions to reveal original features. The work was slow and underfunded. The young republic faced economic challenges, international isolation, and the massive task of rebuilding a nation from empire's ruins. Topkapi was not a priority. World War II brought new difficulties. Turkey remained neutral, but prepared for potential invasion, requisitioning resources and diverting funds to defense. Museum budgets shrank. Staff positions went unfilled. Topkapi's collections were partially evacuated to safer locations, a logistical operation requiring careful packing and transport of priceless objects by workers paid little and working under constant uncertainty. When the war ended, the collections returned, but the palace had deteriorated further. Roofs leaked, tiles fell, woodwork rotted. The post-war period brought both challenges and opportunities. Turkey's gradual integration into the Western economic system, membership in NATO, and tentative embrace of tourism created new possibilities. Topkapi could attract foreign visitors, generating income and international prestige. But this required investment in infrastructure, guides, signage, security, and facilities. The palace needed electricity, modern plumbing, fire suppression systems, and climate control for sensitive artifacts. Installing these systems in a 500-year-old structure without destroying its historical integrity demanded expertise and money. Through the 1950s and 1960s, restoration work proceeded in fits and starts, funded by government allocations that fluctuated with political priorities and economic conditions. A major restoration of the harem began in 1961 but took decades to complete, with work pausing whenever funds ran out. Conservators trained in European techniques worked alongside traditional craftsmen, sometimes clashing over methods and philosophies. Should damaged tiles be replaced with modern reproductions or left as evidence of age? Should later Ottoman additions be removed to reveal earlier structures or preserved as part of the palace's evolution? Each decision involved trade-offs between authenticity, aesthetics, and practicality. Tourism grew steadily, but brought its own problems. Thousands of daily visitors meant wear on floors, moisture from breath-damaging frescoes, oils from fingers-degrading surfaces, trash requiring disposal, bathrooms needing maintenance. The palace needed guards to prevent theft and vandalism, guides to educate visitors, ticketing systems to manage crowds, shops to generate revenue, cafeterias to keep people fed. Each addition required staffing and oversight. By the 1970s, Topkapi employed several hundred people directly, from curators and conservators to janitors and security guards. Each salary was small, but collectively they represented a significant ongoing expense. The 1980s and 1990s saw increased professionalization. The Ministry of Culture provided more stable funding. International grants supported specific restoration projects, and growing tourism revenue created a virtuous cycle. Topkapi became one of Istanbul's must-see attractions, drawing more than 2 million visitors annually by the late 1990s. Ticket sales generated substantial income, some of which was reinvested in the palace itself. But popularity created pressure. More visitors meant more damage, more wear, more need for constant repair. The delicate balance between access and preservation became a daily challenge. Modern conservation is labor-intensive and expensive. Restoring a single room in the harem can take months and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Specialists analyze pigments, stabilize plaster, repair gilt, replace damaged wood, clean centuries of grime from surfaces. The work is meticulous, proceeding square centimeter by square centimeter. A master craftsman might spend weeks recreating a single tile to match those around it, mixing minerals and oxides, applying glazes, firing at precise temperatures. The result is invisible if successful. The room looks as it should, and no one notices the new tile among the old. Climate control presents ongoing difficulties. Istanbul's humidity fluctuates wildly, expanding and contracting materials, promoting mold and decay. Modern HVAC systems can stabilize conditions but are expensive to install and operate. Running climate control in a museum covering 700,000 square meters, much of it historic buildings never designed for such systems, requires engineering compromises and constant energy consumption. Electricity bills for Topkapi run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. The palace also requires security systems, fire detection, modern lighting for evening events, computer systems for ticketing and administration. Each technological layer adds cost and complexity. The treasury still holds treasures worth billions: the Topkapi dagger with its enormous emeralds, the spoonmaker's diamond weighing 86 carats, jeweled thrones and ceremonial weapons, manuscripts illuminated in gold. These objects require climate-controlled display cases, surveillance, and insurance. The relics in the sacred safekeeping rooms, items associated with the Prophet Muhammad and other Islamic figures, attract Muslim visitors from around the world, making them culturally priceless but also security liabilities. Guards monitor every room. Conservators periodically examine objects for signs of deterioration. The cost of simply keeping these collections safe and stable is enormous. Then there are the crises that cannot be anticipated. In 1999, a major earthquake struck northwestern Turkey, killing 17,000 people and causing massive destruction. Istanbul was spared the worst, but Topkapi suffered structural damage. Urgent assessments identified cracks in walls, shifts in foundations, and weakened structures that needed immediate attention. Emergency repairs diverted funds from other projects. Similar issues arose after subsequent tremors. Istanbul sits on active fault lines, and seismologists warn that a major earthquake is overdue. Modern engineers have worked to retrofit sections of the palace with seismic dampening systems, but this is a massive and ongoing project, expensive and technically challenging. Funding today comes from multiple sources, no single stream sufficient on its own. The Turkish government provides base operating funds through the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. Ticket sales generate significant revenue, but they fluctuate with tourism trends, economic conditions, and political stability. When Turkey experiences political turmoil or terrorist attacks, tourist numbers plummet, and museum budgets feel the impact within months. International grants support specific restoration projects, but they come with restrictions and require matching funds. Private donors occasionally contribute, but philanthropy has never been enough to sustain a complex of this scale. The staff of Topkapi today numbers around 600, from the director and senior curators to security guards and maintenance workers. Curators manage collections, plan exhibitions, conduct research, and oversee loans to international institutions. Conservators clean, repair, and stabilize artifacts and structures. Educators develop programs for schools and the public. Security personnel work in shifts, monitoring galleries and protecting collections. Maintenance crews clean bathrooms, empty trash, repair broken fixtures, replace light bulbs, fix leaks, and handle the 1,000 small problems that arise daily in a complex visited by millions. Gardeners tend the courtyards, pruning trees and planting seasonal flowers to maintain the beauty that visitors expect. Each employee is essential, yet most are invisible to visitors who walk through admiring tile work and imagining sultans. The security guard, standing silently in the corner, has likely been there for hours, prohibited from sitting, scanning for threats or careless behavior. The woman cleaning the bathroom downstairs earns minimum wage and commutes an hour each way from a distant neighborhood. The conservator in the basement workshop, piecing together fragments of a broken ceramic, has a PhD and years of specialized training, but earns a salary far below what her expertise could command in the private sector. The palace survives because these people show up day after day, performing work that is essential but rarely celebrated. Tourism presents both salvation and threat. Revenue from visitors funds much of the palace's operation, making it financially self-sustaining in a way it never was under the sultans, who relied on imperial taxation. But millions of footsteps wear down marble. Breath and body heat create humidity spikes. Crowds generate trash and require facilities. During peak summer months, the palace can feel more like an amusement park than a museum, with visitors herded through narrow spaces, waiting in long lines, snapping photos with selfie sticks, often learning little about the complex history they are walking through. Balancing access with preservation is a constant negotiation, requiring strategies like timed entry, limited capacity, roped-off areas, and rotating closures for restoration. The COVID-19 pandemic threw this entire system into chaos. When Turkey closed borders and locked down in early 2020, tourism stopped almost overnight. Topkapi's ticket revenue vanished. The palace remained closed for months, eerily silent for the first time in decades. Staff were furloughed or reassigned. Restoration projects halted. The only sounds were birds and the footsteps of a skeletal security team. When the museum reopened with restricted capacity, revenue remained a fraction of previous years. The Ministry of Culture covered shortfalls, but government budgets were strained by the pandemic's broader economic impact. Topkapi, like cultural institutions worldwide, confronted the reality that their survival depended on conditions beyond their control. The pandemic did offer unexpected opportunities. With no visitors, conservators could work in areas usually inaccessible during operating hours. Major restoration projects accelerated, taking advantage of the empty galleries. Digital initiatives expanded, with online tours and virtual exhibitions reaching audiences who might never visit in person. The forced pause allowed reflection on how the palace might operate differently in the future, perhaps with fewer but more engaged visitors, better interpretation, and greater emphasis on education over mere spectacle. As tourism slowly recovered through 2021 and 2022, Topkapi faced a changed world. Visitor expectations had shifted. Digital engagement was now essential, not optional. Sustainability became a greater concern, with questions about energy consumption, waste management, and environmental impact. The palace introduced solar panels on some buildings, updated lighting to LED, and implemented recycling programs. These changes reduce operating costs over time, but require upfront investment and ongoing management. Climate change presents a long-term existential threat. Rising temperatures increase cooling costs and stress historic materials. More extreme weather, heavier rains, stronger winds, accelerates erosion and damage. Sea level rise, while not immediately threatening Topkapi's elevated position, affects the broader city and could eventually impact infrastructure like roads and utilities that the palace depends on. Conservators now plan for scenarios that previous generations never imagined, developing strategies to protect collections and structures against conditions that may worsen for decades to come. The question of purpose remains unresolved. Is Topkapi primarily a museum, preserving and displaying the past for education and scholarship? Or is it a national monument, a symbol of Turkish history and identity, maintained for cultural and political reasons regardless of cost? Or is it a tourist attraction, valued mainly for its revenue-generating capacity? In practice, it is all three, and the tensions between these roles shape every decision. An exhibition that scholars praise might not attract general visitors. Restoration techniques that preserve authenticity might create results that look less impressive to untrained eyes. Revenue-generating events like weddings or film shoots bring in money but risk damage and alter the palace's atmosphere. The people who manage these trade-offs work largely out of sight. The museum director juggles budgets, navigates bureaucracy, and defends the palace's interests in government ministries. Curators make choices about what to display and how, balancing scholarship with accessibility. Conservators argue for funding against competing priorities, knowing that deferred maintenance today means far greater costs tomorrow. Educators struggle to convey complex history to distracted visitors. Security personnel enforce rules that visitors often resent. Maintenance workers fix problems that no one notices until they fail. Each decision involves compromise. Each success is partial. Each solution is temporary. Who truly paid for this dream? The answer has changed across centuries, but remains constant in structure. Topkapi was built with treasure seized from conquered peoples, its walls raised by laborers whose compensation barely sustained them, its beauty created by craftsmen whose skills were valued, but whose lives were constrained. It was maintained by slaves, eunuchs, and servants whose suffering was the invisible cost of visible splendor. It survived through the work of curators, conservators, guards, and cleaners whose salaries are modest and whose contributions are rarely acknowledged. Every age extracts its price from those with the least power to refuse payment. What does it cost to keep this dream alive today? Approximately $25 million annually, funded through a combination of government support and ticket revenue. 600 employees, most earning wages that barely cover Istanbul's rising cost of living. Constant maintenance that never ends, with each completed restoration revealing new problems. The compromise of balancing millions of visitors with the preservation of fragile artifacts. The knowledge that a single earthquake, economic crisis, or political upheaval could undo decades of careful work. But cost is not only financial, it is also the opportunity cost of resources that might address other needs. It is the burden placed on workers whose labor sustains an institution they may never fully enjoy as visitors would. It is the environmental impact of operating a massive complex, the energy consumed, the waste generated. It is the tension between preserving an authentic past and adapting to present realities. It is the acceptance that beauty and injustice can coexist, that marveling at artistry does not erase the suffering of those who created it. Topkapi endures because people have decided again and again across 5 centuries that it should. Each generation has made this choice differently, for different reasons, at different costs. Mehmed chose it as a declaration of conquest and legitimacy. Suleiman chose it as the stage for his reign's grandeur. 19th century sultans chose newer palaces and left Topkapi to decline. Ataturk chose preservation over demolition, creating the museum that survives today. Modern curators and conservators choose it every day, dedicating careers to maintaining structures and collections that will outlive them. Visitors choose it by purchasing tickets, generating the revenue that funds operations. Turkish citizens choose it implicitly by accepting that their taxes will support cultural institutions alongside schools and hospitals. These choices matter because they are not inevitable. Buildings can be demolished, collections dispersed, institutions closed. History is filled with palaces that no longer exist, treasures that were melted down or lost, cultural sites that decayed into ruin. Survival requires intention and effort. It requires accepting that the past is not self-sustaining, that historical memory must be actively maintained, that beauty does not persist through admiration alone. What Topkapi offers, beyond its treasures and architecture, is a case study in what endurance actually means. Not the romantic notion of eternal glory, but the grinding reality of continuous maintenance. Not the myth of timeless beauty, but the fact of constant labor to prevent decay. Not the fantasy of costless preservation, but the truth that every generation must decide what it values enough to pay for and who will bear the burden of that payment. The palace stands today, 5.5 centuries after Mehmed laid its foundations, not because it is imperishable, but because people have continually chosen to repair it. It stands because conservators climb scaffolding to stabilize crumbling plaster, because maintenance workers descend into cisterns to fix leaks, because security guards work overnight shifts protecting collections, because gardeners plant flowers each spring, because curators research and interpret and advocate, because visitors buy tickets, because governments allocate funds, because the invisible system that sustains visible beauty continues to function day after day in ways that most who walk through its gates will never see or consider. The cost of the dream is not paid once, it is paid continuously in money and labor and compromise by people whose names will not be remembered when tourists photograph the harem's tiles or admire the treasury's diamonds. Topkapi's greatest truth is not found in its architecture or collections, but in the ongoing effort required to maintain them. Beauty is not created once and preserved automatically. It is sustained through constant, deliberate, often invisible work by people whose compensation is rarely proportional to their contribution. The palace is beautiful. The palace is also a burden. These facts do not contradict each other. They define each other. The dream endures, but dreams are expensive. Someone always pays. Understanding who and how much transforms how we see not just Topkapi, but every monument, every masterpiece, every celebrated achievement. Behind each stands a chain of labor and sacrifice extending backward through time and forward into an uncertain future. We inherit beauty, but we also inherit the responsibility to sustain it. That responsibility cannot be delegated to the past. It belongs to whoever stands in the present, deciding what matters enough to preserve and what cost they are willing to accept. Topkapi Palace will stand as long as each generation chooses to maintain it, to fund the conservation, to pay the workers, to accept the compromises. When that choice ends, so will the palace, gradually at first, and then with gathering speed. For now, the choice continues. The conservators return to their workshops. The guards take their positions. The visitors arrive. The palace opens its gates to another day, another crowd, another increment of wear on stones walked by millions. The dream persists, sustained not by admiration, but by service, not by glory, but by the invisible work of ordinary people performing extraordinary maintenance on a monument that cannot survive without them. When you next stand before something ancient and beautiful, will you ask only what it means, or also who continues to pay for its survival and whether that cost is justly shared?